This was during a road trip last summer. I was taking a long route home from visiting a few relatives, so I was driving about 4 hours each day to a different destination. This was after my last stop. Everything left on the last 8 hours of driving home was just empty woods as far as I knew. There was another city I wanted to stop at, but it was just too far out of the way for me to justify stopping there. From my previous stop, I left at 6 p.m. to get to my final Airbnb that I had booked at a cabin about 2 hours away. It happened to be on the route home, so that's why I went with it. I figured it'd be better than whatever cheap and crappy motel there was along the road. Where I was, the landscape was pretty flat, but there were a decent amount of trees scattered around. When I pulled up to the cabin, it was clear they had planted a row of large pine trees perfectly in a line at the front of the cabin, with the gravel driveway going through the middle. Honestly, the outside of it, mixed with the landscape, was a little bit spooky. I parked and unlocked the padlock with the code I had emailed from the host. Despite the outside, on the inside, the cabin looked newly renovated, probably to be an Airbnb, but it was really nice, small but cozy. I didn't unpack much since I'd only be there for the night. I sat at the table and ate a meal I'd picked up from a drive-thru, but only 10 minutes after I'd gotten settled in, there was a knock at the door. It startled me because I never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. I got up and answered the door. There was a man, looking about 40-ish, with a gray and black beard and shaved head. "Hi, I was just stopping by to make sure you got in and everything was good," he said with a smile. Knowing it was just the host now, I said I was good and it was all great. I then said goodnight and shut the door. I thought it was a bit strange he showed up unannounced just to ask if I was okay, but I thought he must have lived close by or maybe even on the other side of the property or something. Also, it's worth mentioning that the guy had an unusually strong odor coming from him. It smelled like maybe he'd been working out in the field all day. I just found it a bit odd as well. I went back to the table and finished eating, then took a shower to wind down for the night. I was only in there for maybe 5 minutes before feeling tired enough and just wanting to lay in bed already. I dried off and hopped in bed, staying on my phone for a little bit, when there was another knock at the front door. This one scared me just as much as the first time, because again, I never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. It had to be the host again, but why? And so soon after he just came over. Immediately, I knew this was odd, and I felt really uncomfortable. I checked my phone, and of course, there was no text or call from him. I slowly walked into the main room, hearing him knock several more times. I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer the door or not, but I ended up just calling out from the other side and asking what he needed. He stopped knocking. "Can you open the door, please? I just wanted to ask you one more thing. I'll be quick, I promise." I didn't respond for a few seconds because I honestly didn't know what to say. In those few seconds, he must have gotten impatient because he knocked on the door again and asked if I could open it. I said it was late and I wasn't in the mood, so if there wasn't an emergency, then I'd like to be left alone. He took a long time to answer after that. The silence was really eerie. Once it reached a whole minute, it was even more so. I didn't hear him walk away, so was he just standing out there? I quietly walked up and looked through the small window on the door. He wasn't out there. I immediately thought that he must have snuck away, because surely I would have heard his footsteps on the gravel if he just walked away. But then, where was he? I didn't know what to do. I felt really uncomfortable and didn't know why he was acting so strange. I stood there by the door for a minute and listened for anything. Honestly, I was scared to move. But then I happened to glance over at one of the windows in the living room. I saw his eyes staring into mine. I panicked and sprinted to the bedroom, where I called 911. While I waited, I heard what sounded like him trying to lift open the window, which was terrifying, but also odd considering he had to have had a key to his own house. But that's when I figured it all out. That man wasn't the host. This was confirmed when police arrived. He'd already run off. We have no idea in which direction, but we got in contact with the actual host and owner of the cabin. I don't know what that man's intentions were that night. Obviously, he was lying and clearly plotting something, but I'm just glad I didn't open the door. I pulled into a parking area. I was confused. It definitely was not leading to a house. I pulled into a space and put my car in park, then looked out my windows all around. There was a sign on one end. This was a forest preserve. I'd done deliveries to parks and whatnot before, but I always thought forest preserves were closed up at like 8 or 9, and I didn't see anyone here to deliver the order to. Just as I was starting to question what exactly I was supposed to do here, my phone started ringing. It was the customer. I picked up. The voice on the other end was a deep male voice, very gravelly and rugged, almost to a point where it was hard to understand them. He said he saw on the map that I'd parked and asked if I could see him. I said no, to which he explained he was camping with some buddies down one of the trails, and I should be able to spot a campfire if I walk a little closer. I said all right, realizing this was probably why the tip was so large. I did mention to him that I thought the forest preserves were closed, but he said this one allowed overnight camping on certain days. I wasn't a big outdoorsy person, so I didn't know any better. I didn't see any reason he'd have to lie. I turned off my car and got out with his bag of food. I quickly realized that it was really dark and I needed to use my phone as a flashlight to see where I was going. There was only one trail leading out from the parking area, so at least I couldn't get lost. I started walking. It was really quiet outside. I expected to hear the group of guys talking and laughing in the distance, but I didn't. It was just the wind and crickets. Then I saw the light. an orange flame glowing and flickering out in the trees. Oddly, it wasn't on the path though, or right off the side of it. It was far out of the way and amid all the trees. I couldn't see too far down the trail to see if there was a direct path going to it or not, but I just started walking straight to the flame. As I got closer, things were getting really strange. First of all, I didn't hear any voices, and secondly, once I got even closer, I didn't see anyone. It was just a small campfire burning in the middle of nothing. No chairs, no tents, literally nothing. I barely got the chance to whisper "what the hell" under my breath before I heard a stick snap from somewhere out in the trees. I jolted my head toward the sound. There was someone there, but too far for the light to reach, and the faint figure that I could make out was standing still, like they were trying not to be seen. I felt really uneasy. "Hey, I'm the delivery driver. I'll just put your order down over here," I yelled out and set the bag on the ground. As I did, they suddenly decided to show themselves and walk toward me. The man was tall, with dark hair and a scruffy beard. He apologized and said he didn't see me walking up. It was that same deep, gravelly voice from the phone. His smile was disturbing, like he was faking it, and it was really strange that he only showed himself once he knew I saw him. Nothing added up. I stumbled over a few words, but as he got closer and closer, I just decided to turn and run. He called out several times in this creepy, overly nice voice, asking me to come back and that he had cash for me. I didn't stop until I got to the car. I fumbled around with my keys in my shaky hands as I tried to hurry in and turn it on. I backed out and pulled back onto the gravel path to leave, but had to slam on my brakes. The chain was latched across the pillars now, blocking the exit. I stared at it for way too long, trying to think if I could get out and unlatch it, or what to do. Then I heard footsteps coming up behind my car. I didn't even look, I just floored it onto the grass and made it around the pillars. It was a tight squeeze, because there was a short ditch really close to the sides, so if I messed up, my car would have slid down and maybe gotten stuck. Once I was back on the gravel, I sped away. I didn't know what that was back there, but I was stupid not to call the police, even though I think that if I did, they likely would have been long gone anyway. The following morning, I did a little investigating and found that the forest preserve I was at did in fact close at 8 p.m. and never allowed camping or campfires. To me, that confirms the horrible nature of the situation I was in. What he intended to do is unknown, and still haunts me to think about what could have happened in the forest that night.
This happened back many years ago. I was in high school in the early 2000s, and one night my parents went out. They left me and my older sister at home, so it would just be the two of us at the house for dinner. Now, at the time, my older sister was 17 years old, and I was 14. We lived in a house in a pretty typical neighborhood. Our parents left us some money to order a pizza or something, and that was the plan. When it got to be like 7 p.m., I told my sister that I was hungry and we should order from this one pizza place that was my favorite. She agreed, and then she called the store with our order. Around 20 minutes later or so, we were just in the living room watching TV, and the doorbell rang. My sister got up and answered with the money that our parents left us. I was like half paying attention as I was more focused on the TV. I heard my sister answer the door and the pizza guy say hello and stuff. I remember that I heard the pizza man ask my sister if she was home by herself, and she replied just saying no. The man said something like, "Oh really?" He couldn't see me from where I was in the living room. The guy said something else, but I couldn't really hear it. I heard my sister respond, but couldn't really make out what she was saying either, but it sounded like she was talking in a kind of rude way. I looked over at that point and saw that my sister appeared kind of annoyed. She handed the money to the guy, and then as he was still saying to have a good night, she slammed the door in his face. Then my sister locked the door as soon as it was shut, sighed, and started walking back over to the living room. I asked her what that was all about. She said, "I forgot about that creep." She went on to say that she was at her friend's house like 2 weeks prior, and the two of them had ordered a pizza. The same delivery guy was the one to show up. I guess that he acted really creepy, trying to flirt with my sister and her friend, and he even asked to come inside the house. They practically had to yell at him to leave and slam the door in his face. She said that she was planning to not order from that pizza place anymore because of him, but forgot about it. I thought that was weird, but I was glad that he was gone now and we had the pizza. I remember that just about 20 or 30 minutes later though, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like a car door closing. I looked out of the living room window and I saw the same pizza guy walking up to the house again. He had a small box in his hands and I wondered why he was at our house again. We hadn't ordered anything else. I warned my sister, and she got up and said that she was going to call the police. Before she could, though, the man started ringing the doorbell again. My sister and I ignored it at first. Then there was a knock on the door. My sister walked over to the door, did not open it or anything, but yelled at the man to go away. He yelled back from the other side, saying that he brought her a free brownie. She said she didn't want it, and was going to call the police if he didn't leave now. What the man said next really creeped me out. He said that he knew my sister was alone, and asked for her to let him in. That's when I knew I had to do something. This guy apparently really thought that she was home alone. I stood up and walked over to the door. Then, trying to sound tough, I yelled really loud in my manliest voice that I was also home and that I was going to come out and beat him to a pulp if he didn't leave. At first, I thought it didn't work. The man said something like, "Who's this tough guy?" He still stood around on the front step and didn't seem too affected, as my sister was now dialing the police. The guy laughed a little, as if trying to sound like the whole thing was a joke to him. Then he finally turned and started walking off. I remember that he walked back to his car and then got in and drove away. The police still came to our house a while later though. My sister made a report and then the cops went to his work. I heard that the man later got fired. Thankfully, he did not come back to our house again after that. I'm glad that I was home that night and was able to help out my sister. The guy was a total creep, and hopefully he didn't harass anyone else like that. I'm a gym teacher and have been for almost 7 years. Back a couple of years ago now, something really crazy happened. So I was teaching several different gym classes, 2 electives and 2 basic required gym classes. The basic ones would be for everyone in the school. We would do basic physical tests and activities as well as some written tests. It was a pretty easy class to get an A in. I remember that on this semester in particular, there was a kid in one of my classes who would rarely show up. He was a student who got very poor grades overall and didn't really seem to try much. He would sometimes only show up once or twice a week. You never really knew if he would be there or not. Then he would randomly show up for a whole week, and his absences were never excused, so his grade in the class plummeted. Probably the largest part of grades for my classes are attendance, which means literally all you have to do is show up and you'll probably pass. I remember that at one point, about midway through the semester, I took him aside and I told him that he really needed to show up more. I tried to make it clear how easy it was to pass the class if he just showed up, but if he kept on the track that he was on, he would probably fail. He pretty much gave me a tough guy routine like he didn't really care and waved me off. Kids are stubborn and sometimes don't understand or care about things like that. At least I tried though. Overall, he showed up on and off for about another week or 2. Then he stopped showing up entirely. He was gone for literally the rest of the semester and I had to fail him. So, during this time, I lived by myself in a small house that I was renting. A few weeks later, I was home one night. I don't remember the exact time, but it was probably like 10 p.m. or so. I just remember that out of nowhere, I heard the handle to my back door start moving, as if somebody was trying to open it. Instantly, it gave me a terrible feeling, because that was not something that had ever happened before. After the door didn't open, I sort of heard the sound of somebody walking near it. I decided to go over and look. Most of the lights in my house were off at this point, so I carefully made my way to the back. When I got near the back door, I went over to a window. Most of the windows were covered, but when I looked through the blinds, I could see outside. At first, I saw nothing. Then I went over to the back door and I looked out of the window on it. When I looked to the right, that's when I saw what looked like the student from my class, the one who rarely showed up that I talked about. He was by himself and now facing another window that led to the kitchen. It looked like he was going to try to break in or something. I took out my phone and I dialed 911. Then I turned the backyard light on. When I turned it on, I just barely saw the kid stop and then look around. Then he seemed to notice me looking out the window at him. He turned and ran, taking off back around the house and towards the street. I still went through with the call to the police and I reported him. I knew his name and gave his information to the cops. He ended up being caught and admitted that he was going to try to break into my house. He said that he just wanted some drug money and that was all. Why he chose me though, I'm not sure. I thought that maybe it was because he was mad at me for failing him or something, but I'm also guessing that I'm not the only teacher that failed him. I mean, he never showed up to school, so he probably failed all his classes, and I don't think he even cared. Maybe he was going to try to rob all his teachers. I really don't know. I also don't know how he knew where I lived. Did he follow me home? Some of those things remain a mystery, but I never had any more problems with him. He was expelled from the school, and I never saw him again.
A really small wooden deck with a sketchy looking fire pit in the middle and a few chairs around it. I sat down and looked out into the forest. The night was really quiet. No cars or busy streets, just the occasional bird crowing in the distance and the trees rustling in the wind. I loved it. Being further up north, though, it was a bit more chilly than I expected. I spotted some logs stacked up on the side of the cabin and figured I'd give the fire pit a try. I lit it up no problem, and the fire stayed well maintained in the center, so I guess it wasn't as sketchy as I thought. Anyway, I sat by it for a while. I never get to do this sort of thing, so I just soaked it all in. After about 30 minutes of being outside, there was a very sudden and just completely out of nowhere sound from within the forest. Honestly, I had no clue what it could have been, but I did think that the way it sounded and echoed through the trees was kind of like an axe chopping into a tree or wood. It was only one sound though, and I didn't think it was really possible for anyone to be out here near us. It was pitch black out there, so I couldn't see anything, but whatever it was, it sounded pretty close. As I stayed out there for the next 5 minutes after hearing the sound, I felt my nerves building up a little bit. Just this uneasy feeling that ruined the peacefulness from before. I ended up snuffing out the fire pit and heading back into the cabin. From the sounds of it, my mom and brother were asleep already. I still wasn't all that tired though. I don't know if it was still from the long nap, or maybe the sound I heard waking me up, but I still didn't really feel like going to bed yet. I stayed up in the living room on my phone. I had some movies downloaded, so I didn't have to worry about Wi-Fi. Only 15 or so minutes in, I heard something. I paused the movie and listened. I wasn't sure if it was the cabin creaking from someone waking up or walking around in their room, or maybe just wind hitting the walls. It gave me that uneasy feeling again, though. I wasn't used to being in this kind of environment, so I think that's why I got so easily unnerved. It was only a minute later that I heard it again, though. This time it was from the opposite end of the cabin, not where the bedrooms were. It was from outside the wall, just next to me. The only thing there was a window. I leaned a little closer and listened. Just when I thought I might be hearing something, a loud sequence of knocks shook the front door. It vibrated across the wooden walls. I froze up for a moment, then heard my mom get out of bed and hurry into the hallway, asking what that was. I was standing up at this point, knowing something was wrong, but told her someone was at the door. I could tell she was pretty frightened too. She immediately went back to get her phone and call 911 because there was no reason for anyone to be banging on our cabin door in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of the night. As she did, I walked up to the door and looked out the peephole. It was extremely dark. There were no porch lights or anything, but I could see the basic figure of a man standing fairly close, just staring ahead at the door. And in the dark, I could see the outline of a heavy wooden axe in his hand. I felt my eyes widen and nerves spiking. Everything rushed through my mind. I tried to think of any reason this wasn't what it looked like maybe he needed help or was lost, or I don't know. Nothing seemed to explain this as being anything but bad. The man banged on the door several more times as my mom was on the phone with an operator. They never spoke though, stating any excuse for them being here. They just aggressively knocked on the door. In the heat of the moment, it was hard to tell how much time passed. It felt like forever though. But then he did what we were all terrified of. One loud crack slammed into the door, and the slightest bit of the metal axe pierced through the wood. At that point, we all ran into the farthest room and locked ourselves in. We heard more hits against the door, but only 4 or 5 before they stopped. We weren't sure if he'd busted the door down already, or if he had given up, but we just waited. It took just under 15 minutes for the first officer to arrive to the cabin, which was honestly quicker than expected, given how far out we were. The front door had several large gashes in it, but there were no signs of the man having gotten in. There were also no signs of where the man went. It's just assumed that he walked back out into the forest. The running theory is the guy was out in the forest when he saw my campfire from all the way out there, luring him to the cabin. It doesn't explain what he was doing out there at night with an axe, or why he came up to the cabin, but there's not really any way to know those things without him being caught and questioned. We obviously didn't stay there any longer. In case you were wondering, we didn't end up moving there either. I work at a data center. It's at a small warehouse/office place. My job is to just stare at a monitor and make sure all the systems stay online. If anything goes down, I head to the operating rooms to usually just give it a quick restart. It's a really simple and easy job, and because it's overnight and just me, I can really do whatever I want, so long as I'm constantly checking the status of all the systems. Although, I'm sure you can tell just how boring it can get sometimes. By the time this happened, I'd already seriously considered quitting several times, but forced myself to stick with it. Anyway, this night I drove over to the office at my usual 10 p.m. The building was at the end of a long road and backed up to trees, so there were never any cars or people in the area. I parked and headed up to the office. This week, I had a show on Netflix that I'd been binging for my entire shifts, so after giving the computers a few checks, I immediately set up my laptop and started watching my show. For reference, there's usually no trips in any of the systems during my shift. Since it's overnight, there's less of a load on everything, so it's less likely anything will happen. I'd say maybe twice a week there would be an outage, and it'd only be a single system that I can quickly just restart and get working again. I think I got through just about 2 episodes of my show, so it was about 2 hours in when I saw a notification pop up on the monitor. One of the systems lost connection. I paused the show and got up. I walked downstairs and through multiple corridors until I got to the huge storage room that was the main hub of the data center. There were massive rows of shelves all throughout the room. The notification I got had a row and section number. I walked down the aisle and over to the correct section. It happened to be the very last row and the section on the far corner, and strangely, it was really obvious why it was down. The main power cable wasn't plugged in. It was laying on the ground like it had been pulled on or fallen out somehow. I really didn't know how that was possible. In all my years of having the job, I'd never seen a heavy-duty cable randomly fall out like that. It just doesn't happen. Regardless though of however it happened, I plugged it back in and booted up the system. Everything came back online and seemed to be working properly. The obvious and really only answer to fall back on was that it did somehow just wiggle out of the sockets. Maybe over time it slowly shook out, and it just so happened to fall out tonight. I did a quick walkthrough of the rest of the aisles, checking for anything else while I was down there. Then I started heading back through all the corridors and back to the office. As I was in one of the corridors, I heard an unfamiliar sound. It was almost like a heavy door thumping closed in a doorway. It was a little creepy sounding, especially with there being no other sounds in the entire building. Unfortunately, I didn't really know the rest of the layout of the warehouse, so if it actually was a door, I had no way of knowing which door or where at. And although it sounded like a door, it very well could have been anything else. This was a massive warehouse, and often the metal pipes would bend and creak in the walls, or make similar thump sounds. It was just that exact sound I hadn't heard before. I made my way back to the room and sat down. I double-checked the systems again, then continued my show. Only a few minutes passed by, and I'd barely even gotten through one scene before I heard what sounded like a couple of fast-paced footsteps scurrying through the corridor next to me. It gave me a quick jump scare, but I got up and opened the door, looking down the hallway. There was nothing there, just an empty corridor with a door on the far end, but it sounded like it was just outside of the office I was in. I knew I wouldn't be able to keep my mind off of it if I didn't take a look around. I walked toward the end and opened the door. When I did and looked down the next hallway, I barely saw the door on the other end closing, like someone had just went through it. My heart was pounding now. I cautiously walked further up and opened the door. This one led to a hallway with multiple office doors in it. "Is someone in here? Hello?" My voice echoed through the corridor. I took a few steps inside. It was eerily quiet, not the slightest sound throughout the building. Were they hiding in one of these office rooms? As that thought creeped into my head, I got really unsettled and decided not to go any further down that hallway. I took one step back toward the door, but just when I did, one of the office doors next to me swung open. I only caught a glimpse of a man running out of the unlit room before I turned and booked it out of there. I could hear his footsteps echo behind me as I made it to the next corridor and into the staircase. I didn't want to risk getting trapped, so I took the fire exit door and just ran out into the parking lot. Once I got closer to my car, I started calling the police. Whoever was in there didn't chase me out the same exit though. The cops made it pretty quick and did an extensive search of the entire building, which took nearly half an hour. But the guy was gone, probably ran out a different exit and into the woods behind the building. Him being in there explained a lot though. The wire that had been disconnected earlier in the night was on the corner section, which the man probably bumped into while sneaking around. The company I worked for did a huge investigation to review security footage and try to figure out how he got in and if he stole anything. I didn't get much information on it, however, because I'm not authorized. I think it's pretty clear that whatever he was in there for, he likely didn't want me to know and was probably planning to prevent me from blowing his cover. How he would have done that after leading me through the corridors, I'm fortunate enough to not know.
I used to work as a delivery driver for the local pizza place that was by me. It was a pretty good place and popular in the local town. There would be a lot of deliveries that I would get, and I would have to drive all over. I still remember my creepiest delivery though. It was kind of like the stereotype delivery that I did not want to get when I signed up for the job. So we got an order pretty late at night, like 11 p.m. I got the pizza and then I got the address and headed out. I didn't know where it was, but I knew that I had never really delivered to that area before. At this point, I was still fairly new to the job, and I was also young, like 18 years old. Upon arriving to the neighborhood, I saw that it was really sketchy looking and run down. Many houses there had overgrown yards, and some had boarded up windows. There were old cars with duct tape holding up the fenders and looking all beat up. When I got to the house that I was to deliver to, it didn't look any better than the rest. I was already creeped out and didn't even want to leave the car, but I had a job to do, so I parked on the side of the street and then got out. There was also hardly any light provided by street lamps. There were just a few, and then I crossed the street and I walked onto the property. I made my way to the front step and then rang the doorbell. I saw that all the lights inside the house appeared to be off, which was not a good sign. As I waited, I was getting more and more nervous by the second. After probably a full minute, I still hadn't heard anything. I wanted to just bolt out of there and go back to the shop. Still, I forced myself to stay there because the pizza had not yet been paid for. Within a few more seconds, I started to hear movement inside, like somebody was walking around, but I still didn't see any lights turn on or anything. I just had a strong instinct to run and get out of there, so I did. I just set the pizza down and then bolted, like I had wanted to do much earlier. I literally ran off the property, leaving the pizza on the front step. Then I crossed the street again and made it to my car. After I got inside and started the engine, I felt much safer. Before leaving, I looked around. That's when I saw what appeared to be a man walking through the front yard. It was really dark, so I couldn't see very well, and the house was slightly behind me, but I saw a guy start to walk out and cross the street from the property. He was like 50 feet at least behind my car, and he wasn't walking towards me, but it still seemed odd. It seemed like this was the guy who had been in the house, and he hadn't even picked up the pizza. So at that point, I started to drive away. As I was making my way down the street, I saw the lights to this car that had been parked a ways behind me on the street turn on. That guy must have gotten inside of it. Then the car started driving. The first thing that I noticed at this point was how quickly the car accelerated, much too quick for the residential street that we were on. As I continued to drive, the car quickly caught up to me and was soon right on my bumper. That gave me a bad feeling once again. I turned off the street to a busier one, and the car behind me did the same thing. I realized then that I was likely being followed. I started driving around randomly and turning at random places. The car kept up with me and did the same things that I did. With it being really late at night, the roads were pretty quiet. That made it probably easier for the guy to keep up with me. It wasn't until I had been randomly driving around for like 10 minutes that I remembered to go to a police station, and it worked like a charm. The guy followed me until we were there. Then he circled around the parking lot of the station before leaving. I stayed there for a few minutes, called my boss to explain what had happened, and then went back. Luckily, I didn't get in trouble with my boss for not getting the money for the pizza. He understood that it could have been dangerous. I didn't have to deliver to that neighborhood again, which I'm really grateful for. Other than that, I enjoyed being a pizza delivery driver. That story still gives me the creeps to think about though. I'm a high school gym teacher. It's a job that I really like because I played sports in high school and college as well. I'm a pretty active person, so it's fun to help the younger people become more active and stuff. Anyways, one of the other reasons I like being a gym teacher is because I generally don't have to grade that much stuff. I would not enjoy teaching another subject where I would have to be grading papers constantly. But for gym class, there are only a few points in the semester where I do have to grade. Each class is required at our school to have a written final test, and some are required to have midterms as well. So on the day of this story, we had just taken finals. Our tests were not just on the Scantron or online though. There was a good amount of writing parts that students had to do, so that meant I would have to read each one of them and grade them. I figured that I would get it done that night, and I told myself I was not leaving until it was finished. Now, I had 4 classes to grade and about 100 tests total. I began grading right when school ended at about 3 o'clock. I continued on, taking only short breaks a couple of times. When I was finally done, it was almost 10 o'clock at night. Now, by that point, I'm pretty sure that I was the only person left at the school besides the overnight janitors. I packed up my things and then left the school to walk to my car in the parking lot. The teachers would park in the east lot, which was sort of in the back and next to a heavily wooded area. I would always park sort of in the back corner. That's where my spot was. Now, when I walked out there, immediately I saw these 2 guys kind of standing around. They were much too old to be students, but I didn't recognize them. They also did not work at the school. They were near my car sort of, and just standing under one of the few lights that was in the parking lot. It looked really sketchy right away, but I didn't want to back down. I continued walking to my car, and I noticed the 2 men just stare at me with their hands in their pockets. I had the instinctive urge to run away, but I fought it. I kept walking, and when I got about halfway to my car, I realized that the men were not going to move. They were going to stay right by my car, and there was no other cars in sight. So I decided to say something. I said, "Fellas, what's going on tonight?" None of the men said anything back to me. They just kept looking at me as they sort of paced around. As I got even closer, I saw both of them start to walk right in my direction. Now, to me, this seemed like they wanted some trouble. I'm not a violent person, but I would like to think I can take a guy in a fight. 2, on the other hand, is a different story. These guys had their hands in their pockets, so they very well might have had weapons on them too. And because of that, I made probably a stupid decision. I realized that they were both going towards me, and I finally listened to my instincts. I turned around and just took off running in the opposite direction. Thankfully, they didn't take out a gun and shoot me or anything, but they did start to chase after me. For what reason, I don't know. Being a gym teacher, I'm pretty fit and can run pretty fast. In fact, I was a sprinter in high school, so I used my speed to take off back towards the school. The man raced after me, but I was able to pull away with my speed. I kept going and did not stop until I was on the complete opposite end of the school. Then I took out my phone and dialed 911. I looked around and no longer saw the guys. I walked down the sidewalk until I saw police cars approaching about 5 minutes later, and I flagged them down. Then we went back to the parking lot where the men were. When we arrived though, they were gone. I spoke with the officers and then made a report. Then I was able to drive home. After that, I never saw or heard anything more from the men or about the incident. Thankfully, I haven't walked out to my car that late at night again either. This is something that happened a few years ago. So, I live alone in a 2-story house about 10 minutes outside of the city. I enjoy living here, and one night I ordered a pizza to be delivered. I was certainly craving a nice pizza, and I was excited for it to arrive. A while later, I heard the doorbell ring, and I walked over and answered it. It was the pizza delivery guy, and I handed him the money, and he gave me the pizza and breadsticks. My hands were full, and I remember that after saying bye to the delivery guy, I was struggling with the door. He said that he would get it, and he shut the door for me as I walked to the kitchen with the pizza boxes. Then I went and got some pieces of pizza, went into the living room, and watched a movie while eating. It was a great relaxing night, until a few hours later. I was now watching another movie and still on the couch. Out of nowhere, though, I heard the front door opening. I was so confused at first. Obviously, I live alone, so nobody else would be entering the house. It was at that moment that I realized I hadn't locked the front door. Normally, it's a habit that whenever I close the front door, I lock it. However, my hands had been full with the pizza and I hadn't closed the door. The pizza guy had. I had simply forgot to go back and lock it. I couldn't believe someone was entering the house though, and I didn't know who. I did what made the most sense to me at the time. I jumped down from the couch onto the carpeted floors. Then I crawled over to the corner of the room and I hid behind this large lazy boy chair. The living room was also in the back corner of the house and the opposite end from the front door, so I had a little bit of time to hide. It was a pretty good hiding place, but if whoever was in my house really looked, they would find me. I heard footsteps and I realized that I didn't have my phone. I had left it on the couch about 15 feet away from me. This was not good. Whoever was in the house entered and then started walking closer. They went into the kitchen area and then the dining room. Then I heard them start to enter the living room. That's when I got really nervous. However, whoever this was didn't get that close to where I was hiding. They stayed at the far end of the room and seemed to walk up the stairs. I didn't dare try to look and see who it was, and I stayed put. When I heard the person reach the top of the stairs, I decided to make a run for it. I knew that I would be able to make it out of the house if I was quick. So I got up, tiptoed to the couch, got my phone, and then ran over to the front door. I left the house, called 911, and then ran to my car and got inside of it. I drove a few blocks away and waited for the police. They arrived a short time later and entered my house with my permission. They ended up finding a man hiding upstairs in my bedroom. I had no clue who he was and had never seen him before to my knowledge. He obviously had just walked right in the house. I was really grateful that I was able to get away when he went upstairs. I'm also grateful that he was still there so the police were able to catch him. Something really strange and creepy happened to me once. This was back about 25 years ago or so. At the time, it was just my husband and I living in our house. We lived in a neighborhood with many other houses on it, but it was generally pretty quiet, especially at night. I remember one evening around 7 or 8 p.m., I was looking out of our front window for whatever reason. I noticed that there was a mail truck parked on the side of the road on the other side of the street. I didn't know what it was doing there. We had already received the mail earlier that day, plus something about the truck looked off, like the mail logo wasn't quite correct looking. To me, it seemed kind of suspicious. I didn't see anybody get out of it though, and I couldn't quite tell if anybody was inside. Several hours later and I looked again, and the truck was still there. I found that to be very odd. Our street was not really the type that would have cars parked on the side of it a whole lot. There wasn't really much that I could do about it though. I know by the next morning, the truck was gone. So really I forgot about it until the next night though. This time, the truck came back again. It was later than before though. I was passing by the front window at probably 10 o'clock at night or so, maybe later. I noticed that the same mail truck was stopped on the side of the street. This time though, I saw movement in the driver's area. Then the door opened and a man got out. He was wearing a jacket and a hat, as well as sunglasses and a backpack. It looked sort of strange. Then he walked up into the yard of the people who lived across the street from us. I watched as he went up to their front step, and then he kind of got out of my view. I knew he didn't live there, but I thought maybe he knew the neighbors and was visiting. Still, I kept watching though. Soon the man appeared again walking down the yard. Then he crossed the street and entered our front yard. I quickly ducked down from the window. The man walked all the way up and then got to our front step. I could hear him there. There was a brief 2 knocks at the door before he turned and quickly walked away. I peeked out of the window to see the man walking back down, and then I saw him go into the next door neighbor's property. I then went and told my husband about what was going on. When he came to look though, the man was out of sight. His mail truck was still there though. My husband got curious and decided to go outside. I didn't know what he was going to do, and I told him not to go after the guy or anything because he might be dangerous. But when my husband opened the door, he realized that there was something on our front step. It was a single VHS tape. He brought it inside and showed it to me. This was a long time ago, so of course we had a VCR. We were both very curious as to what was on the tape, because it had no label or anything. We put the tape in the VCR and pressed play. It started out looking like a home video taken from a video camera, and it was showing out the windshield of a car driving down the road at night. There were no sounds other than the driving sounds. This continued for about probably 5 minutes. Then the camera turned, and we could see part of the man's face. He was still wearing sunglasses and a hat though, and only like half of his face was visible in the frame. He then started laughing in a really creepy way. This continued for an uncomfortable amount of time. It was enough to give my husband and I the creeps. Then it abruptly stopped. That was all that was on the tape. We looked outside and the guy was still gone. We thought about calling the cops, but decided not to. A while later, the man returned to his mail truck vehicle and left. It looked as though maybe he was giving the videotapes to everybody who lived on our street. Why, though, I have no idea. After that night, he never came back. I never found out who the guy was or why he did that. Maybe it was just a strange and creepy prank. Either way, it really freaked me out. I used to be a pizza delivery driver. It was a job that I had for about a year when I was younger. The pizza place that I worked for was pretty good. I enjoyed working there. I remember that we had this one customer though that got banned from ordering from us. He would often call and order pizzas to his house. Then he would act really creepy or rude to the delivery drivers. 3 different ones had all reported him, sometimes multiple occasions. So our manager ended up banning him, and there was literally a note on the wall saying not to accept his order, because he would try calling and ordering, or ordering online, and we wouldn't let him. A couple of times after he was banned, some of his orders got through because we had forgotten, and that led to more complaints. I personally never had to deliver to him, but I heard from the other drivers that he was just not nice at all. I guess he cursed out one of the delivery drivers for no apparent reason once. Another time, he called one of the drivers a curse word, and then another time he tried to get one of the delivery drivers to enter his house, and when they said no, he literally tried to pull her inside. We ended up getting a new manager hired though, who was part-time. His name was Andy, and overall he was cool, but kinda bossy. One time when I was working as a delivery driver, he gave me a pizza and an address and told me to deliver it. I immediately recognized it as the banned address. I took it up with Andy, and I told him how the guy was banned and we weren't supposed to deliver there. Andy said that he had already took the order. He said, "Look buddy, just do one more delivery there for me." So it was apparent that I had to go, so I took the pizza and then left. I was kinda mad at Andy, but I was also curious how the creepy man would act. I figured maybe I could just give him the pizza, get the money, and leave without a problem. How hard could it be? If he wanted to yell stuff at me for whatever reason, he could go right ahead. I didn't really care. I didn't know if the guy was just a grouch or if he enjoyed being rude to people or what. Eventually, I arrived. He lived in what looked like a pretty typical neighborhood. I took the pizza, got out of the car, and then walked up to the front step. Before I even reached it though, the guy opened his front door and was looking at me. He looked to be in his 50s or so, had dark sort of long hair and a handlebar mustache. He also had an open can of Miller Lite in his hand. "Who the F are you?" he called out as I was walking up. I said, "I'm the pizza delivery driver delivering the pizza that you ordered, sir." He then told me to just give him the pizza already and shut up. So I walked up to him and handed him the pizza. I could smell the strong smell of beer as well as cigarettes coming from inside the house. I told him the price, and the guy said, "You expect me to pay for this crap?" That's when I got worried that I wasn't going to get out of there with any money. I told him, "Yes, I need the money." The man then said that he had the money inside his house, and I could go and get it if I was brave enough. I thought about it for a moment and thought, no, I don't think I am. But then I realized that I really needed to get the money or Andy would get mad at me. So I tried to do a compromise and I asked the man to go get the money for me. He said no. Then I reluctantly said that I would go get it. The man stepped back and I entered the house. It was very cluttered. There were boxes and beer cans everywhere. I stayed just inside of the door. The man then said that the money was in the basement. At that point I thought, heck no, and I turned around and just walked out. The man started saying something, but I didn't even care. I ran out of his yard and back for my car. He was yelling at me the whole time. I got in my car, left, and drove back to work. When I arrived back, I was furious with Andy. I told him that the guy was totally insane and we never should have took the order. Andy asked for the money, and I said how the guy didn't pay. Andy started to give me some kind of new employee orientation lecture about how I have to make sure I get money from the customers or the business will lose money. That really ticked me off. I literally started yelling at Andy that the guy was trying to get me to go into his basement. It got heated for a moment, but Andy ended up understanding, and after a conversation, he was cool about it in the end. After that, we never delivered to that guy again. I've been a mailman for almost 10 years. For the past few years, I've had a walking route that I do every day. I live by the city, so there are some very large neighborhoods that I deliver mail to. I have a route that I go on, and I walk from one house to another with my large mail bag, dropping off the mail for each address. When the weather is nice, I really enjoy it because I get lots of good exercise from walking so much. In my entire time working the job, I've never been scared of anything, not even dogs, and that's mainly because I deliver in the morning time and not at night or anything. But one day, that all changed. I was delivering on my route through a very large neighborhood. There were tons of houses all pretty close to each other. So I was on the route, and at one point I came up to a house just like any other. The houses around there did not have mailboxes down by the street, but would instead be up next to the door of the house. So I walked up the steps to the front porch area with the mail ready to put it in the box. When I got there, I saw that the main door to the house was open and just the screen door was closed, so I could kind of see inside. There was a man standing not far away from the front door, and he looked over at me as I was walking up the steps. I just kind of nodded hello to him, and he seemed kind of surprised to see me. He didn't really react though, and then I stepped up towards the mailbox. However, when I was about to put the mail in, the man from inside suddenly spoke. He said, "Hey, can you just bring the mail inside here quick?" I said sure, and I opened the front door and stepped inside the house. After getting in, I saw the man, who was pretty tall and also large. He told me to set it on the kitchen table, which was about 10 feet away. I walked over and set the mail down, but as I was doing so, I heard the front door closing. I looked over and saw the man standing directly in front of it and facing me. He had a very serious and almost angry look on his face. Then I heard another man's voice from down the hallway somewhere in the house yell, "What's going on over there?" I was confused, but just wanted to leave and continue with my route. I started walking over to the man standing in front of the door. He wasn't moving at all though. Then I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. I looked over and saw another man come walking into the room. He saw me and said, "The mailman." "No." I looked around and asked if I could leave. The big guy said to me, "No, you ain't leaving." I had a bad feeling, and I had had a bad feeling ever since the guy shut the door. I looked around and saw a back door. It was kind of just an instinct, but I took off and started running for it. As soon as I did, both men started to chase after me. I was able to make it to the door, but when I stopped to open it, the smaller man caught up to me and tackled me to the ground. There was a brief struggle, and the big guy came over there as well. Honestly, my mind kind of went blank, and I don't fully remember what happened. I just know that somehow I was able to fight them off just long enough to get up and make it out the door. I took off running outside, and the men briefly chased after me, but I was faster than them, and I ran down the street far away. When I realized they were not chasing me anymore, I stopped and I called the police. Then I waited there for them to arrive. They went to the house, but the men were gone. It turns out, though, that neither of the men owned the house. They had broken in and were robbing it. That made a little more sense to me as to what happened. I had been very confused. Despite being shaken up, though, I was thankfully not injured and was able to continue with my route for the day. Several days later, the police located the men who had done a string of robberies in the area. Looking back, I'm really glad that I made it out of there okay, and I'm glad that the men were caught. I work for the U.S. Postal Service and am a mailman. I drive a mail delivery truck every day and deliver mail to houses as well as some apartments and businesses. I've had several different routes over the years. My craziest experience happened about 2 years ago now. My route at that time took me through this pretty nice neighborhood at one point. It wasn't like a super wealthy neighborhood or anything, but I just thought that it was a nice neighborhood. It had decent houses on both sides of the street, and it was never that crowded or busy overall. I enjoyed driving there, and the people seemed to be pretty nice. So one morning, I was making my deliveries. I would drive right up to the mailboxes and then just put the parcels right in the box and then continue on. So I reached one mailbox and I saw the house up ahead that would be the next one had a fairly short driveway and the garage door was open. As I finished putting the mail in the box that I was at, I slowly proceeded to the next mailbox. As I was doing so, I saw a man walking out from the garage of the house ahead, and he walked down the driveway towards the mailbox. The man had a beard, sort of long hair, and I remember that he was barefoot. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt though. He approached me as I was about to put the mail in his box. He told me that he would just take it and held out his hands. So I gave him the mail and told him to have a nice day, and then I drove on to the next house. I continued with my route and didn't really think anything more of it. The next day, just about the same thing happened. The guy, who was once again barefoot, walked down the driveway and took the mail directly from me. Then he walked back up the driveway and into the garage. I had never seen the guy before, but I didn't really pay that much attention to who lived where. I delivered to a ton of houses in the area. The next day, though, I got called by my supervisor and told that someone on my route was not receiving their mail. I was very confused because I knew that I had delivered to every address. I'd been doing the job long enough to be confident that I had not made a mistake. I found out where exactly I was told they weren't getting their mail. I realized it was the barefoot guy who I had been handing the mail to. This made me angry because I was literally handing the mail right to the guy. I told my boss this, and he said that he would get back to me. A short time later, he told me that the homeowner never accepted the mail directly from me, and nobody else lived there. He told me that the guy who lived there is gone at work all day when the mail arrives. I was confused and thought that maybe his neighbor was stealing his mail or something. The next day at my route, I did not see the barefoot guy. I put the mail in the box and continued. Later on, I found out some crazy information from my boss. He told me that the guy who lived there said that a man had been secretly living in his garage without him knowing. After he heard about me handing the mail to a guy coming out of his garage, he went into the garage to look around. Apparently, that's when he found the guy living there. I guess the man rarely used his garage and hadn't been in it in weeks. After he saw the guy, he called the police, and the man was arrested for trespassing, and his mail was also in the garage. It was the craziest thing I ever heard. I was also relieved that I hadn't done anything wrong and wasn't in trouble. The guy who lived there actually called me personally to thank me, which I thought was really nice. At the end of the day, I'm really glad that I was able to help, and that the man living in the garage was caught without causing any major problems. That's been my craziest experience as a mailman.
I live in northern Utah, on the edge of a small highway town. There's not really anything but a few stores, truck stops, and motels right up along the main highway. The roads to the outskirts are all dirt, just leading to a few other homes and large private acres of forest and grassy fields. This was a pretty typical day for me. I worked remotely from home and finished up around 6. From there, I headed into town to grab some groceries and stock up on a few items around the house. Even though it was a highway town, the highway wasn't actually all that busy, so none of the stores were ever too crowded. I pulled in and started shopping. While I was in there though, I happened to notice a guy looking at me. At first, I thought nothing of it. I probably just looked over at him at an awkward timing while he happened to be looking over at me. I kept going about my shopping, but a couple minutes later, and in a different aisle, I saw him again in the corner of my eye. He walked into the same empty aisle I was in and stood just 5 or 6 feet to the side of me. I kept looking forward and tried to find what I needed, but I noticed he wasn't really moving around or grabbing anything, so I just shifted my eyes a little bit over so I could kind of see him better. Even though I wasn't looking directly at him, I could tell he was looking at me. This time I said hi, then continued about my business. The man didn't say anything back to me. I hurried up and grabbed what I needed, and left the aisle. Honestly, I just thought the dude was a little weird, but I wasn't thinking too hard about it. I went to the checkout counter and paid for everything, then headed back out to my car. I parked in the far back of the lot, like I usually did. I tossed everything in the trunk and got in, and when I looked up at the rest of the parking lot, there were maybe 30 or 40 other cars, but something felt off. Then I saw him again. He was standing between a couple cars, looking over in my direction. He didn't have any groceries in his hands, so I don't think he even checked out or got anything. The hell was up with this guy? Probably some creepy trucker running on 2 hours of sleep or something. I pulled out of the parking lot and started heading home. The sun was mostly down by now, so the empty dirt roads were dark and quiet. I parked out front and brought in the first couple bags of groceries. While putting that stuff away, I got a little sidetracked by a phone call from my dad, but eventually I got back to it and headed back outside to my car to grab the rest of the groceries. When I did, I saw something. I had to squint and let my eyes adjust to the dark for a moment, but far out, and kind of off the side of the dirt road, there was a truck. Its lights were all off. I could only see the general shape of it, silhouetted by the night sky. I own just under 40 acres of land, so where that truck was on my property. It definitely wasn't there when I drove home, And if it was just turning around or lost, why would it be parked with no lights on? I slowly walked up to my car and got my groceries out, keeping an eye on the truck the entire time. The best possibility I could think of was that it could be just some regular driver that pulled off the highway and thought that this empty land would be a good place to sleep instead of paying for a motel. Even though it was on my property, I wasn't going to make a fuss if I didn't have to. You never know who could be in there or what they might do. I went back inside. After tossing the groceries away, I opened up the curtains on the front of the house just so I could keep an eye out there. Over time, say the next hour or so, I felt less and less nervous about it and thought that it was almost surely a driver sleeping. Still strange, but harmless. I spent another hour in the living room watching a show and never saw the truck move. It was getting late, so I closed the curtains and went upstairs to get in bed. I think I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, in the middle of the night, I woke up having to use the restroom. I never checked the time, but I think it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. I got up, half asleep, and walked across the bedroom floor and into the hallway where the bathroom was. As soon as I opened the door, I heard a creak downstairs. I'd never heard that happen before. I listened for a second, then closed and reopened the door to see if it happened again, but it didn't. I walked to the end of the hallway and looked down the stairs. It was all dark down there, only a small amount of moonlight coming in from the kitchen windows. But there was something in that downstairs hallway. I could see a shadow moving ever so slightly on the side of the wall. I couldn't tell if it was actually in the hallway or maybe outside the back door and the shadow was just reflecting onto the wall, but I immediately felt my heart pumping. I quietly backed up and went back into my room, closing the door as slowly and carefully as I could so as to not bring any attention. Then I got my phone and called the police. I kept my voice low. For the first 5 minutes I waited, I didn't hear anything. I started doubting that they were in my home, until suddenly I heard creaking again. Very slow and very subtle, walking across the floor below me. It sounded like they went into the living room. A minute later, a cop car showed up. There was a scurry of footsteps running around down there, and eventually leaving my home just as the officers ran up. Thankfully, they caught him running back up toward the truck that was parked in the field. Disturbingly, I recognized him as the creepy guy from the store earlier. I guess he really was stalking me. Even worse than him following me and breaking into my home, he was armed. The guy claimed he was just trying to rob me, but from the looks of it, it seemed way more personal than that. And I don't know how long he was inside my home for, but he never took anything. He didn't even have a backpack to take anything with. Plus, he knew I was home. He probably was watching me from somewhere outside all night. What he really would have done is better left unknown. I worked at a local pizza shop in my mid-20s. It was just a small place that did deliveries and had a few tables inside for dining in. In all honesty, the food wasn't that great. The only thing that was really special about the place was that it was open 24/7, so any not-so-sober people would usually come in all throughout the night. I often worked alone, but I didn't mind it. Actually, I preferred it. None of the food was hard to make, and whenever it was slow, I could usually do whatever I wanted while waiting around. This night was no different than any other, at least to start. I headed in at 9 p.m. and took over for the day manager. There were no special tasks or anything that I had to do that night, and with it being a Tuesday, I was prepared for a chill night. I prepped some of the workstations in the back and just waited for any orders to come through. I got a few customers in the next couple hours, but then it went radio silent. No walk-ins or calls. I pretty much sat on a chair in the back of the kitchen and scrolled on my phone the whole time. But around 1 a.m., I heard the bell by the door ring, which happened every time someone opened the door. I got up and walked to the front where the counter was, but I stopped as soon as I could see the main room. Nobody was in there. I stood in place and looked side to side, but there wasn't anyone at all. A short smile broke across my face as I walked further up and quadruple checked that nobody came in. I found it funny, like I must have been so used to hearing that sound all night long that my brain was playing tricks on me now. Being sure it was nothing, I went back to my chair in the kitchen. I really didn't think about it at all after that. For the next 15 minutes, there were still no calls or customers, until I heard the bell ring again. This time, I wasn't even watching a video when it happened, so I knew I actually heard it. I got up and walked into the main room, but stopped in confusion again. Nobody was in there. After a second, I walked up to the front door and opened it, sticking my head outside and looking up and down the sidewalk that went along the building. There was nobody out there, not even any cars in the parking lot. I wouldn't say I was really scared or creeped out, but more so just really confused. I messed around with the door for a little bit, trying to see if it would ring without opening, but it didn't seem to. This was really weird, but I didn't know what else to do about it. I stayed up front for a while, at least 30 minutes, waiting for the door to ring again, but it never did, so I went back to the kitchen. It was between 2 and 3 a.m., which was always the slowest time of the night. Unsurprisingly, once I was in the back again, only a few minutes went by before the door rang again. This time, I stayed sitting and listened for anyone. I didn't hear anything, but just to be safe, I called out, "Hello? Is someone out there?" I got no response. I figured it was just the door doing whatever the hell it was doing, so I just ignored it and stayed back and continued on my phone. Somehow, there wasn't a single customer for a whole hour after that, so basically the past 3 hours were completely dead. It was 4 a.m., so for my last hour, I had to start prepping everything for the next shift. I got up and went to the front. I started counting the register from the few orders I had at the beginning of my shift, but while I was there, I felt strange. Something just felt off. I kept looking up at the empty room ahead of me and back at the kitchen behind me, feeling like I was being watched or something. I thought it was just the unusual nature of the night I was having, with the door and everything. I was just thankful my shift was over soon. Another couple minutes went by when I suddenly heard a thump on the floor behind me. It was just like a boot stepping on the ground, which instantly sent a chill through me and made me quickly turn around. I felt my breath leave my lungs. There was a man standing just 5 or 6 feet away from me. He had all black, ripped up clothes and a hoodie draping over his face, stopping just above his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot and hollow. I don't know if he was drunk or high or what, but he clearly wasn't sane right now. Then I saw his left hand was holding a knife. His knuckles were white from how tightly he was clenching it. I stayed motionless, trying not to escalate anything, but after several seconds of him not making a move and just staring at me, I decided to speak. "Hey, listen, you can have the cash from the register. I won't say anything. Please just let me go," I said, trying to say anything I could to get out of this. He just stood there though, still clenching the knife and having that 1,000-yard stare. Honestly, I think I was even more terrified because he clearly wasn't some normal guy. There was no predicting what he might do. The counter I was at was L-shaped, extending toward the back where he was. So to run away, I'd actually have to run a couple feet toward him and around the counter, then back toward the front door. With him only being 5 feet from me, he could easily grab me or attack me if I tried. So I did the next best option. I basically dove over top the counter. It wasn't pretty, but I guess it kind of worked. I slammed into the ground and got up. The guy was already sprinting at me with a face of uncontrollable bloodlust and rage. I ran out the door and only got a few seconds away before I heard him get out the door as well. He was too close for me to even try getting inside my car, which was behind the building. I just kept running, making it to the road and hoping a car might drive by and help. But at some point, he stopped chasing. I don't know when, because I was so focused on sprinting and not looking back. I called the cops and waited at the road for them to get here. It took about 5 minutes. The guy was gone, but I guess after chasing me, he went back inside the shop and just demolished the place. Everything was trashed, and he left out the back door, where he then scraped his knife all over the side of my car. It's likely he was watching me inside the shop through the windows from a distance and using the door as a distraction, hoping to slip in without being noticed. Admittedly, it worked perfectly, which makes me feel pretty dumb. It's also pretty creepy knowing that there was about an hour gap between the last time the door rang and when I saw him, so he was probably hiding inside the shop that whole time. It's really strange though, because I really had no idea who he was. I really thought he was just some random guy, but his actions seemed oddly directed toward me. Maybe it was just a wrong place, wrong time sort of thing. I don't know. They never found him. I didn't stay working there very long after that, fearing that he might come back.
I used to work as a pizza delivery driver for Domino's. The most insane thing that happened in my time there took place one late Friday night. Obviously, Fridays are pretty busy for pizza deliveries, and we were also open very late, I think to 2 a.m. So I started work at 6 p.m. and was working until close. It was a busy night as it went on, but I made lots of money in tips. When it was around midnight, things started to quiet down. I remember that we got an order and I was supposed to deliver it. It was just a simple medium pepperoni pizza, and I took it and went to my car. When I saw the address, I didn't think much of it at first. It was just an address. However, when I arrived, I realized that it was another Domino's pizza. I figured that this must be some kind of a prank or something. The Domino's location was less than 10 minutes from ours. But as you know, Domino's is an extremely popular chain, and they're all over the place. I wasn't quite sure if this was a mistake, or a joke, or a prank, or what. I parked in the parking lot, took the pizza, and then headed inside. I remember that this Domino's was in a sort of quieter street on the edge of an area with other restaurants and stores. The parking lot was mostly empty, and at the end of the small lot behind the building there was a steep hill going up with tons of trees on it. That led up to a wooded area. So I went inside the Domino's with the pizza, and the workers inside seemed confused. I said that somebody ordered a pizza there and asked if this was a joke. The 3 employees inside stopped making pizzas and all looked around at each other asking if they had pranked one of them. None of them had done it though. It seemed as though maybe someone else had. I asked if anybody wanted the pizza and they said no. However, the pizza was not paid for yet. I told them that I was just as confused as they were and I would take the pizza back and say it was a mistake or something. So I left the Domino's and started heading back to my car. Just then is when I heard a voice yelling from just inside the woods to my far left. It was a man's voice and he said, "Hey, over here." I looked and there was a guy standing a few steps on the hill. He said that he had been the one to order the pizza, so I started to walk over to him, hoping to get some kind of an explanation for this. I mean, what was he doing in the woods? Why didn't he just order from the Domino's that was right here? I figured maybe he made a mistake and ordered online from the wrong location or something. But if he was there, why would he request for it to be delivered? When I got to him, he didn't give me an explanation though. He just said, "Bring the pizza up here." Then the man started to walk up this narrow path that was barely even there through the woods. So I took the pizza up the steep hill, nearly tripping over all the tree branches and stuff. When I reached towards the top, we were in this thick woods where I could barely see. It was like pitch black, and the man stood there and then took the pizza from me. I told him the price, and he took his wallet out of his pocket and started counting his cash. As he was doing that, I looked around and then noticed something strange. There was another guy sitting in one of the trees about 20 feet up. The guy was wearing a ski mask as well, just sitting on a branch up in the tree, seemingly looking in my direction. This situation was seeming really sketchy and not something at all that I had signed up for. As soon as the guy gave me a $10 bill, I just took it, said thanks, and then started walking away very quickly. The guy said, "Don't you want a tip?" I said, "Keep it," and then just started to walk back down the hill as fast as I could. I didn't stop and nearly ran back down the hill the rest of the way to the parking lot. Then I literally jogged to my car, got inside, and left. I drove back to the Domino's that I worked at, and I told what happened to everyone that was inside working. They found it very amusing. I could laugh about it afterwards, but the scene was just so bizarre and strange, and I have no idea what was going on there. Maybe it was just a prank to scare me. If so, it certainly worked. When I was in high school during my junior year, I took a running class. It was a gym class, and we would do all kinds of running and jogging exercises. The class was overall pretty easy. I remember that the weather was pretty nice for most of the semester, so we would go outside a lot. One day in particular, our teacher took us across the street from the school and down the street a ways to a local park. It was a place that had jogging trails and a very large woods. At the time of the class, which was the morning, the park was very quiet and hardly anybody was there. Along with the teacher, we were supposed to jog around the trail for basically the entire class period. I remember that the teacher led the way and we all started jogging behind him. In the class with me was one of my good friends, David. We always talked during class and would jog together for most of the runs that we would go on. I remember that him and I were talking and we were at the very far back of the group. We didn't feel like trying hard that day and just wanted to take a nice easy jog at the back. Because we were going so slow, I remember that I was kind of looking around at the scenery as well. A good ways into the run, and we approached this spot in the trail that had really thick woods. As we were running through this spot, I noticed something off the trail and into the woods. There was something black on the ground that did not look natural, such as a rock or a plant. It was very out of place being in nature, and at first I figured that it was just trash, like a box or something. But after jogging a few steps and not knowing what it was, I stopped. David saw that I was looking at something and asked what it was. We both walked into the woods a little bit to the spot to get closer. The item in question was about 25 feet or so off the path and partly obstructed by the leaves and plants on the ground. The woods were pretty dense, but when we got closer, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a PlayStation 4 sitting there, and this is when they were the newest gaming system and were somewhat hard to get. David said, "Is that really a PS4? We went to get closer. However, when we were maybe 5 feet away, we heard the sound of movement to our left. We looked over and there was this guy standing about 20 feet away from us next to a tree and looked somewhat disheveled. The man shouted, 'Get away from me,' and then started to charge towards us. Both of us just turned and ran out of there. We got back to the path and then sprinted to catch back up with the rest of the class. Neither of us knew who the man was, obviously, or what he was doing in the woods. Did he live in the woods? Was that his PS4? Why was there a PS4 there? Those were the questions that were racing through my mind as I jogged the rest of the way. We finished up the class and then we went through the rest of the school day. I couldn't stop thinking about the PlayStation 4 just sitting there in the woods though. I didn't have one myself yet, and I obviously wanted one. After school, I met up with David again and we both agreed to go back to the woods. We wanted to see if the PS4 was still there and if the man was gone. We were both a little bit nervous because the guy seemed like he might be dangerous, but it was worth the risk to us. David and I entered the park and then jogged back to the spot where we had seen the PS4. Sure enough, it was still there. We looked around and did not see the man, so we both entered the woods again. We went off the path and we approached the PlayStation. It was just sitting there on the ground by itself. There were no controllers or plugs hooked up to it. It was just the console alone. David and I picked it up and were about to leave when we heard a voice shout from behind us again. It was the same man with the beard. He screamed at us to stop. Then he demanded us to give him back his PlayStation. He looked terrifying, and so we did what he said. David set the PlayStation back down on the ground, and the man just stood there like 10 feet away from us. Then the man yelled at us to leave. We turned and sprinted out of there. Then we ran all the way back to the school and went home. It was a terrifying experience, and I wondered why the man who was seemingly living in the woods had a PlayStation 4. I mean, how would he use it? There was no TV in the woods that I saw, and where did he get it? It just seemed really weird. Well, later on, I got some answers. I found out that the PlayStation 4 had actually belonged to a kid that was in my grade. Apparently, the PlayStation broke, and he was really mad about it, so he took it out to the woods and chucked it. That's why there were no controllers or anything else there. It was in fact broken, so even if we had gotten it, it wouldn't have worked. Who the man was and what he was doing in the woods, though, I never found out.